Bradford, England, July 6, 2022, 7:15 p.m. Police officers with West Yorkshire Police had been on the hunt for a high-risk missing person who hadn't been seen since late June. As the hours and days ticked by, hope was fading that she would be found safe and well. Investigators were combing through Fitzwilliam Street, which was located next to an area of wasteland where people would often illegally dispose of rubbish. As officers continued their searches, they were told to look for any gaps in the wall that they could peer through to see if anything stood out. One officer was able to find a gap and look through, and something quickly caught his eye. A carpet was wrapped around an object that had been tied together with string. It was surrounded by flies. The string was noticeably clean and new. As they approached, they were hit with a smell that law enforcement recognizes all too well, the smell of death. The carpet had boxes of rotten food and rubbish piled on top of it in an apparent attempt to conceal it. Peeling back the carpet, they were met with a scene that many of us can scarcely begin to imagine. It was the severely decomposed body of a woman who was completely unrecognizable. Although they were yet to formally identify her, they felt sure that this was the woman they had been searching for. Although the hunt for her had come to an end, the investigation into what had happened to her and why was just beginning. Today's case takes us to Bradford, England, home to 20-year-old Somaiya Begum. Somaya was a bright, hardworking young woman who was a biomedical science student at Leeds Beckett University. She also worked part-time as a carer for the elderly and disabled, a job she loved. She once posted to social media saying, "I was not sure what path to take as I have no prior experience in care, but since joining, I'm having the time of my life. The management is so supportive and encouraging. Overall, I'm ecstatic to be a part of this team." Somaya was someone who kept to herself and was described by neighbors as being quiet, but she excelled at university. She passed her first year with excellent marks and displayed a fantastic set of academic skills and a great dedication to her studies. Finally, after years of turmoil, things appeared to be looking up for her. Somaya came from a large but very fractured family, torn apart by a feud that had been going on for years. At the age of 16, Somaya had gone to the police. She had been promised in marriage by her parents to someone she didn't want to marry, one of her cousins in Pakistan. Her father, Yasin, had threatened her with violence if she didn't agree to it. So she made the immensely brave decision to go to the authorities. A forced marriage protection order was taken out on September 7, 2020. This applied to her and her siblings. A forced marriage protection order can stop someone from being forced into a marriage or from being taken out of the country. It can also help return someone to the United Kingdom if they have been taken abroad. Following this, all of the children were removed from the home. Somaya then moved into a house on Binney Street with her paternal grandmother and her uncle, Dawood Khan. Moving out and living at 32 Binney Street gave Somaya the freedom and independence she wanted. Now that she was away from home, she could eat what she wanted, dress in the clothes she liked, see her friends as she pleased, and watch what she wanted on television. One of her relatives would later say that she had actually been homeschooled for several years and forbidden from going to university. Living here meant she was also free to continue her education. June 25, 2022. Somaya had been on a late shift at work and was captured on CCTV walking home at 12:04 a.m. As morning came, it was a normal day in Bradford. At 3:35 p.m., Somaya sent a message to one of her closest friends. The friend later replied at 4:40 p.m., sending Somaya a video of the rain outside her window. She sent the message on WhatsApp, but it didn't deliver. Her friend didn't think too much of it, believing that maybe Somaya's phone battery had died. However, as time went on, her friend grew more concerned and sent another message to Somaya. "Can you text me when you get this, please?" But she still heard nothing. The following day, she contacted Somaya's family to see if they had heard from her. She was told that a missing persons report had already been filed. When Somaya's uncle, Dawood, got back to the house on the day she had last been seen, he noticed that the front door was unlocked, which was very unusual. Upon entering the property, he found Somaya's uncle and his brother, Mohammed Tarus Khan, in the house at 6:30 p.m. He asked him, "What are you doing here?" Mohammed was not actually allowed to be at the house, as he was known to be abusive and violent. Mohammed had a long criminal record with several convictions. He had been convicted on June 23, 2016, of battery against his own daughter after he had used a knife to threaten her, saying he would chop her up because he had found out that she had been contacting boys. A restraining order had also been taken out against him in 2016 to prevent Mohammed from having any contact with his mother or going to her house at 32 Benny Street. The hours ticked by, but there was nothing from Somaya. This was very unusual for her. Whenever she went out, she would always be sure to tell Dud and her grandmother where she was going and for how long she would be gone. Dud began calling her and left her a message, as did her aunt, but there was still no response from her. As the panic really started to set in, Dawood again tried contacting his niece at 11 minutes past midnight. Her aunt also called her again, but still could not get a response. The calls to Somaya's phone carried on throughout the morning and afternoon. At 1:15 p.m., Dawood reported her as missing to the police. West Yorkshire Police attempted to make contact with her and called her phone several times, but just like everyone else, they too got no response, and their calls went straight to voicemail. They also attempted to contact her uncle, Mohammed, who had been at the house that day, but he too was not responding. Also that day, officers were out on patrol, and at 5:44 p.m., the message came through that there was a high-risk missing person that they needed to begin looking for. They were asked to go to a shipping container at 1A Cargate Works, where 53-year-old Mohammed had lived since November 2021. As they arrived at his address, he was hanging his washing out and waved at them as they drove past. The unit he lived in was small and compact, 30 feet long and 9 feet wide, with another unit stacked on top of it. Parked outside was his Mitsubishi space wagon. The officers asked him why he had failed to respond to numerous calls the police had made to him. He said he had just been busy. He also said that he had been to Benny Street the day before to give his mother some fruit, arriving at the house at around 2 p.m. The door was locked, so he had called Somaya to get her to unlock and open the door for him. He said that Somaya was not in the living room when he left and that he didn't see her. As the search for Somaya continued, the police began tracing the movements of her uncle, Mohammed. After trawling through the surveillance footage, Mohammed was seen on CCTV at 1:52 p.m., arriving on Benny Street on the 25th of June. One of the officers from West Yorkshire Police was tasked with listening to the audio from the CCTV cameras on Benny Street. The officer was able to hear a male voice saying, "Get thee out of my face!" and then, "I'm coming back." Footsteps and running could be heard before the man said, "Come back, come here." A female voice could then be heard saying, "Lock the door." This wasn't the only concerning evidence they had found. They had observed Mohammed's car later driving around. He had parked on Mill Lane and removed what appeared to be a large and heavy item from his car before dragging it away. At 5 p.m. on the 27th of June, Mohammed Khan was arrested on suspicion of kidnap. When the officers questioned him, he was quick to say that he had a bad memory. But in spite of the severity of the allegation against him, he appeared to be very relaxed. He said that his relationship with his niece was generally good. As the officers continued to talk to him at 7:30 p.m. that day, other officers went to 32 Benny Street to conduct a search and take photographs of the property. Later that evening, they went to 1A Cargate Works, where Mohammed lived, to take pictures too. The officers continued taking more photographs the following day, and they found a smoldering bin by the side of his unit. It contained a partially burnt mobile phone, which was taken away to be examined and analyzed. It was later found to be Somaya's. Mohammed was interviewed again on the 28th of June at 14 minutes past midnight at Trafalgar House Police Station. He was asked again about Somaya's disappearance, but he provided no answers. The officers asked him if he really wanted to help find his niece. His response, "I've given my statement, and there's no further comment." He was interviewed later again that day at 5:07 p.m. He reiterated that he did not know where she was, and his lawyer told him he should make no further comments. The officers asked him about going to Benny Street despite the restraining order barring him from doing so. He said he had a good reason for going there, but refused to elaborate any further and answered no comment to all remaining questions. The magistrate granted the police a further 36 hours to question him, but they would later release him under investigation. On the 1st of July, investigators were back at Benny Street, and it was then that they found something that caught their eye. On a red metal table and the underside of the carpet in the living room, they found bloodstains. They were swabbed and sent away to be analyzed. They later came back as a match to Somaya. The officers continued to look at Muhammad and his movements on the day she had last been seen. On the 25th of June, he was captured on CCTV footage having a key cut for the house on Benny Street, giving him the ability to let himself in again. This was a property that the restraining order stopped him from visiting. At 3:49 that day, he was back at Benny Street. CCTV recorded the raised voices of a man and a woman. It was also around this time that there was no more activity on Somaya's phone. Phone data showed that he had made internet searches to look for big rubble sacks. CCTV. Footage from the shipping container where he lived showed him reversing his Mitsubishi space wagon towards a container and locking it. The angle of the door blocked whatever it was he was doing from the view of the camera, but he was also wearing gloves. 11 days after she was reported missing, the discovery that people had been dreading was made. Somaya's body was found tied up in a carpet and dumped on waste ground, left to decompose in the summer heat. A postmortem was carried out. It was discovered that a 4-inch metal spike was lodged in her back. Her lung had been punctured as a result. The pathologist said that this was not, in and of itself, an immediate life-threatening injury if one were to seek medical assistance. However, if someone failed to seek medical attention, it could be fatal, mainly due to the risk of infection. The pathologist stated she was satisfied that there was evidence of trauma, including potential assault prior to death, and that there was nothing evident in the postmortem examination that suggested natural disease or illness. The Home Office pathologist was unable to determine exactly what Somaya's cause of death was due to the level of decomposition, especially around her head and neck. However, the police stated that she had been subjected to a vicious and sustained attack. The news was devastating, and many people were affected. Ed, the head of her course at Leeds Beckett University, paid tribute to her, saying she was a dedicated student who was well liked by her peers and teachers. On the 6th of July at 9:10 p.m., officers arrived at Muhammad's address, and he was rearrested, this time on suspicion of murder. It was now his 6th time being interviewed by the police. Beginning at 4:41 p.m. on the 7th of July, he was told that the previous day the police had found the badly decomposed body of a woman. Although they were yet to identify her, they strongly believed it was Somaya. He said he had no clue what they were talking about. When asked if he was responsible for her death, he replied, "Definitely not." He was asked about his movements on the day she was last seen and said he had just been driving around with nowhere in mind, as he simply enjoyed driving. The officers asked if he had been driving around to find a place to dispose of Somaya's body. This was something he denied. Why had he parked so close to where her body would ultimately be found? He said, "It's a free country and I could park there if I wanted to." He claimed it bore no relevance that she would later be discovered there. Why had her phone also been found burning in a bin next to his unit? That could just be a coincidence, he said. He claimed he was really upset at the thought of a family member being treated in this way, explaining that he wasn't violent and believed most people would describe him as a fantastic person. They questioned him about why he had a key cut to the property. He told them it was because his mother had just had a heart attack, not so he could go back to the house to remove Somaya's body. His seventh and final interview was conducted at 1:04 p.m. on the 8th of July. The officers played him the CCTV footage, and once again he had no comment to make. He was asked about the CCTV footage that showed him removing something heavy from his car. He said, "It was just rubbish. All I know is that this is a rubbish tip, so I thought it would be a good place to tip some rubbish." He was quizzed about the metal spike that had been found lodged in Somaya's body, but he said he didn't know what it was. He told the police he thought they were obsessed with trying to put the blame on somebody just to make it look like they had been doing their job. He added that he felt he was being forced to take the blame for something he hadn't done. His protestations of innocence made no difference. He was charged with murder and remanded in custody. He later appeared in Crown Court on September 20th via video link from HMP Leeds to enter his plea. When asked what his plea was, he replied, "Not guilty." He denied the charge of murder, but admitted to perverting the course of justice by disposing of her body and attempting to destroy her phone. At Bradford Crown Court, Mohammed Terrace Khan went on trial with Mr. Justice Garam presiding. Prosecutor Jason Pitter said Somaya had met a traumatic death following a violent attack at her home. He said that her body was dumped and left to rot and decompose on wasteland like rubbish, such that she was not recognizable. Mohammed's previous statements that he knew nothing about her death would later change in court. His lawyer stated that Mohammed had been summoned to B Street to dispose of her body and that he knew nothing about the death until after Somaya had been killed. Mohammed did not give evidence during the trial. The prosecution stated, "The proper inference to that is because he simply cannot answer, because he is guilty." Regarding Mohammed's motive, it was suggested that this was a so-called honor-based killing, rooted in the belief that Somaya had brought shame upon the family by refusing a marriage in Pakistan. Mohammed's lawyer countered that his client would have no motive to kill Somaya, suggesting instead that her father, Yasin, would have a motive. Somaya's aunt said Yasin had been humiliated and incandescent with rage after she reported him to the police over the forced marriage. However, Yasin was not present at the trial as he had left for Pakistan on a one-way ticket after divorcing his wife. Despite the defense's arguments, the prosecution maintained that Mohammed was not only responsible for disposing of Somaya's body, but also for her murder. The CCTV footage, the raised voices, the cut key, and the last communication on her phone were all presented as evidence. The prosecution stated, "Whilst we cannot say precisely when Somaya was killed, you can conclude that something significant happened around that time, as there was no further communication from her." Following a 10-day trial, the jury deliberated for 9.5 hours over 3 days before reaching their verdict. They rejected the argument that Mohammed had only disposed of the body and found him guilty of murder. Mohammed Terrace Khan was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years for murder. He was also sentenced to 5 years for perverting the course of justice to be served concurrently. The outpouring of anger and shock following Somaya's murder was immense. Neighbors and local residents left flowers outside the property. A local councillor stated that the community had been deeply affected. Somaya was described as a bright, brave woman who had fought for her freedom. Her tragic death renewed calls for action against honor-based abuse and violence.